Hello, Tube, and welcome to episode 14 of Author Interviews, where today I have the pleasure of speaking to Mark T. Bates, who is the author of, let me just get it up,
Good morning.
of Best Six. I also have my copy here, which is a horror novella, in fact, Mark's debut horror novella. So, how are you, Mark?
Yeah, pretty good, thanks. It's 11 o'clock Saturday morning, been rushing around, just dropped my daughter off to her drama class and rushed back to do this. But yeah, all good, just about made it.
Oh, good. Now, you've been writing this, as I say, this is of course your debut, but you've written short fiction before. And how long have you been writing in terms of being published?
Yeah, this is my debut novella. I've kind of been writing on and off kind of my whole life, really. Mainly sort of non-fiction. Come out of university, set myself up as a freelance music journalist, did that for many years. And then when the pandemic started, I set up my web page, which is www.cultzilla.com. Essentially just as a bit of an outlet to write about my two passions at the time, which were horror movies and heavy metal music. And started putting out posts sort of weekly on there. Started building up a following on Instagram, X, Facebook, etc. And then maybe around about 2022, I decided to revisit creative writing, which is something I hadn't done for a little while, but I used to do when I was young, and just and had Cultzilla as an outlet where I could post those short stories if I sort of struggled to sell them elsewhere, as it were. And yeah, just got really into it, got the bug, love writing, just found that, I had a real passion for doing it regularly. And then sort of naturally, I think once you've written a handful of short stories, you try to write a bit longer. And then The Curse of Six, which I wrote last summer, was my first attempt at sort of getting something over that probably sort of 5,000-6,000 word mark. I think it's about 28,000 in all. So yeah, sort of a good novella length. It's come out about 100 pages. But hopefully those 100 pages, there's a lot kind of packed in there. So hopefully it's a bit of a page turner. I know you've read it. You put a nice review out the other day, so thank you very much for that.
Quite right. I really did enjoy it. I should say that there'll be a link in the description to Mark's website if anybody wants to go and visit it, as well as his X account. So I do wonder, were the other stories that you've written set in the horror genre, or is this
Yeah, so I would say yes. I'm definitely a genre writer. I think the first story that I wrote was probably more of a sort of crime thriller. And then when I rewrote it, I added a supernatural element, which I really enjoyed. Subsequently, everything has kind of been horror. One story that I wrote, which went out on Cultzilla, is more of a kind of a horror sci-fi. That was really fun. That's set on a spaceship like 100 odd years from now. So it's really good to sort of tap into sci-fi, which is definitely something I'd like to do more of. But yeah, I'd say I'm definitely a genre writer, horror, crime, thriller, sci-fi. That's what I enjoy reading. That's what I enjoy watching in terms of movies. And yeah, that's kind of where I'm at with my writing too.
When it comes to Curse of Six, was that an idea that came to you suddenly, or was it that it sort of developed as you went along?
Yeah, it definitely developed. So I tend to come up with ideas in the most random of places. So I might be out on a run, I might be in the shower, I might be in the car on the way to work, and suddenly I'll just, have an idea that I think would make a good story beat. So as soon as I have that, I've stopped driving or whatever, I stick it into my iPhone notes. And I've got quite a nice list of stuff in my notes there that potentially would make good stories or, you know, good scenes. And The Curse of Six, I mean, it's one of those which just completely developed as I was writing it. So my first idea was literally just the main character. You know, he's in quite a desperate situation at the beginning of the story, and I had that idea, and then just the idea of exploring what it was that had led into that point. So it was as simple as that, really.
So, with the Curse of, this is the story of Curse of Six. You said that the main character sort of came to you, and you should develop from that. What in particular inspired you about inspired sort of the main character? Would you say, or if there is anything in particular?
Yeah, I think really it's just, like I said, it's that sort of desperate situation that this person finds himself in. Is something which is, you know, very prevalent in society, unfortunately. And there's always a reason that someone, you know, is sort of taken to the edge, as it were. And I just wanted to explore with a supernatural twist what it was that had got this person to that point. There is something which kind of influenced the story, which I read probably a month or two before I started writing it, and that was Susan Hill's The Woman in Black.
Yeah.
Now, that is just an absolutely superb, you know, gothic horror story, and that inspiration is definitely in The Curse of Six. Although I've done obviously a contemporary version of it, but just that kind of, you know, the symbol of that antagonist in that story. I don't know if you've seen the Daniel Radcliffe movie from Hammer Horrors. So yeah, you've read the book, you'd probably see the similarity there. But that was definitely an inspiration. Something else that inspired me with the kind of curse aspect, again going back to movies, Stephen King's story Thinner. I don't know if you've seen the movie adaptation of that. That's about a guy that's cursed, and he's obviously trying to get to the bottom of what the curse is and how he can get out of it. And Sam Raimi's Drag Me to Hell. Again, another really good curse movie. So yeah, I mean, you know, this is absolutely not a direct like copy of anything, but those are certainly inspirations within the story. And again, it's just something that sort of like developed over a couple of months. I don't know. Do you write yourself?
I try. I've not done anything big at the moment, anything particular at the moment. But I do know what you mean.
Yeah, it's just one of those strange things. I tend to like to have the story beat, know where it's going to finish, obviously know it's where it's going to start, but then the middle is a complete mystery, and it kind of takes on a life of its own. And you know, whilst you're writing, you'll kind of get yourself from A to C, and you'll suddenly miraculously have a great idea that becomes B. And it kind of works. Sometimes it doesn't, but I think you just draw inspiration from stuff that you're reading, stuff that you're watching. Yeah.
The story is set mainly in the early 2000s. Was that something that you decided to initially, or was that something that sort of organically came?
Yeah, and I think it organically came. One thing that a friend of mine, who sort of kind of one of my beta readers, has pointed out is that all of my short stories are never set in the present day. I'm definitely a period writer. I've written as far back as the 17th century. I've written a story about a witch hunter. I've written a post-World War II story. I tend to set quite a lot of stories in the 80s. I think with this one, I didn't necessarily start out with the intention that it wouldn't be modern day. However, it covers a time period of kind of like 35, 30 years with the flashback that's in it. And then I knew that I wanted the flashback to be kind of early 70s in that era. And then so I just kind of had to work out the ages of the characters and where that would bring us. And also the main character kind of being of that age in the late 90s, early 2000s, similarly to how I was aged at that time. So I think it's just quite easy to imagine, you know, yeah, there are mobile phones there, but they're not, you know, iPhones or smartphones. They're just really basic phones. So he does have a phone at one point in it, but it would just be a basic phone.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it just kind of come naturally.
Yeah, I did ask that because I know that I can't remember which horror writers or horror director said it. That you have to either set your horror film in the past or somewhere out in the woods to make sure that the mobile phones don't work or they don't have them, because that sort of ruins the story.
Yeah,
and
they
also,
do. I think mobile phones do ruin horror stories. Yeah, you're right.
yeah, and there's that. The other thing is that setting in the past, particularly British sort of ghost fiction, in particular, that's quite common. So M.R. James's stories are almost all set about, with the exception of one or two, about 20 years before he's writing. So,
Yeah. Well, that's the great thing about story writing. You're tapping into your imagination, and you can set it whenever you like, and I think for me, my favourite horror films are 70s, 80s, that era, those 2 decades, very different, but just, you can't beat it. And I think I grew up reading Stephen King, Clive Barker, James Herbert, all the stories that they wrote in the 70s and 80s. So I think I've just got a natural affinity to that time period. And that is kind of when someone says horror to me, that's instantly where my brain goes. The 70s is very much, ghosts and demons, religious horror. 80s is very much body horror, crazy stuff like Nightmare on Elm Street. And I just find myself gravitating to that time period, to be fair. Like I said, I have written one set in the future and definitely have an intention to revisit that as well. But yeah, maybe I just find this time period dull. I've got no intention to write a COVID horror story or anything like that.
yeah, it does seem a thing today that horror, with one or two exceptions, doesn't seem to be doing much at all in the way it was even 25 years ago. It just seems to be we seem to be sort of in the doldrums at the minute.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's some great films coming out, and I think the indie horror scene, from a literature point of view, is really cool. But again, I think a lot of the really good stuff that's coming out now is perhaps set in the past. I know revisiting the 80s has been huge for a little while. Stranger Things, It, those kinds of things. Plus, that time period is when I was a child as well. I was born in 1981, so kind of grew up in the 80s, teenager in the 90s, and then an adult in the 2000s. Yeah, I think we always look to our past and have a good affinity with stuff that we loved as kids. My next story that's being published is coming out on the Dark Corner blog later this month. And again, that is a late 80s set, kind of satanic panic style. So yeah, I'll just keep going backwards.
Yeah. There's also that thing of it's called the nostalgia cycle, where every sort of 30 to 40 years, the period that was maybe sort of 30 or 40 years before suddenly comes back into fashion in terms of elements of the fashion and the music, and particularly sort of films and books being set in that period.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, to be fair, I listen to loads of music from the 80s and 90s as well, primarily. Again, I think it's kind of still having that affinity as an adult as to what you enjoyed as a kid. Even when I was probably too young, my dad had all like the Hammer horror films on VHS and Alfred Hitchcock films. I remember watching Psycho and Christopher Lee's Dracula, probably when I was 7, 8 years old. So yeah, my very first sort of dip of the toe into horror would have been, from the late 60s, early 70s.
Yeah. I mean, I was a kid where in 91, and when I was about 10 or 11 years old, they started playing late night on BBC Two on a Friday, the old Hammer films. I really enjoyed it. And so,
you can't beat them.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And back then, we only had like 4, well, maybe 5 channels on the TV. I tell this to my daughter, she can't believe it, but there was no Netflix, no Amazon Prime, none of that. And so you were very much kind of reliant on finding films quite often with what, you know, the TV channels were showing. And Channel 4 used to be great on a Friday, Saturday night, you know, 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock at night. They throw on, you know, something like a Friday the 13th film or Halloween or, you know, something like that. And that was how you discovered movies. That and the video rental store, of course.
Yeah. No, it's I know I've got a nephew and they're who've been 10 years old, and they don't sometimes believe when I've told them when I was born there's only 4 TV channels.
No, they don't believe it. It's amazing. No mobile phones. Yeah, I mean, I was quite fortunate in the sense that my father had a bit of a hobby of buying VHS cassettes, so we had, you know, quite a library of films in the living room to choose from. But it was really fun going out to Blockbuster,
Yeah.
you know, and maybe picking 2 films to rent for the weekends. Now, of course, you don't have to leave the house to do that, and it's convenient, as is, you know, life these days. But yeah, it was definitely fun to experience films that way.
Yeah, there's a sort of lost to people who used to have the TV guide or the radio, and you'd mark in it where the film was, so you could to set the video recorder to record it if you were over in place.
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely. And like getting the most exciting was getting the Christmas radio times and seeing all of the brand new films that were going to be shown over Christmas. One of my earliest memories, actually, on I think it was Boxing Day when I was proper young, was watching the first Ghostbusters with my family, and we had people round and we all crowded round. It must have been in the afternoon or early evening, and watched the original Ghostbusters from 1984.
Yeah,
yeah.
It's an interesting one. I don't know if this is true elsewhere. I know at least in Britain, for some reason between sort of 2000 and 2010, that was the period when at Christmas they put on the old Universal films. So the first time I ever saw The Mummy or the original Frankenstein was in that period. And I don't know why they did it, but whoever did it, I'm very thankful who came up with the idea, because I wouldn't actually know films otherwise.
Absolutely, yeah. Those obviously classics, the origins of the horror scene. One of the earliest ones I remember was Abbott and Costello meets Frankenstein. My dad had that on VHS, and I think that was probably my first introduction to Universal horror. Obviously, it's really funny, but you know, Bela Lugosi as Dracula, Glenn Strange as the monster. It was really cool.
You mentioned Stephen King's influences. Are there any other authors or say directors who influence you in terms of your stories?
So, any other kind of influences was that? Yeah, I think just like any kind of person that writes horror, you can't help be influenced by Stephen King. He's the master. I probably started reading him when I was 10 or 11. I think Misery and It. So he's just a massive influence on me, and I think just the amount of his stuff that's been made into films as well is just it's phenomenal. In terms of short story writing, the first time I was kind of exposed to that would have been as a teenager, and I picked up the Books of Blood by Clive Barker, and I just absolutely adore them. I think they are so cool. I've read them a few times throughout my life, and at the time it was just so different to kind of Stephen King. You know, he's a lot more kind of fantastical. There's a lot more fantasy in there. And then I started reading James Herbert. So he was kind of our English version of Stephen King. Never quite hit the same heights, but his stories I think are just really good, fast-paced kind of pulp horror, and that's what I like. You know, nothing too fancy, just a good story idea, written as a page turner. Yeah, so those are the classics. Movie wise and directors, I love crime films. I've always been a big fan of Tarantino. A couple of his films, some of my favourites all time, specifically Inglourious Bastards, his Second World War one.
Yeah,
absolutely love that film. I really like body horror from the 80s. So David Cronenberg's The Fly. It's one of my all-time favourite films. I love John Carpenter. You know, obviously Halloween, The Thing. Slightly more modern than that, Guillermo del Toro. Absolutely love his films. I think Pan's Labyrinth is, you know, just absolutely phenomenal. Really looking forward to seeing his version of Frankenstein, actually, which comes out on Netflix, I think, on the 7th of November. Be really interesting to see his take on it.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure if you saw it. It's also on Netflix. His Cabinet of Curiosities, that anthology.
Yeah, that was really good. Yeah, everything he does is amazing. He's just such a visual sort of auteur. You know, the Hellboy films, love them. But yeah, Frankenstein would be really interesting because he does have such a unique style, and obviously Frankenstein has been done, you know, to death. So it's really, really interesting to see. You know, I'm imagining it's just going to be incredibly gothic and fantastical, and yeah, I think we're quite lucky that that one's just almost coming straight to streaming, so saves on a trip to the cinema.
Yeah. I think a great pity with Del Toro is we never got his In the Mountains of Madness.
Yeah, that's it, isn't it? I think, well, I think he'd been planning on doing Frankenstein since the 90s. So some of these projects, they do tend to take a while to come to fruition. So, you know, we may get that. Who knows?
Yeah. I wonder if you saw the new Nosferatu film.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that it was weird that it come out on, I think, Christmas Day in America, and then it come out on New Year's Day here, and I literally went and saw it New Year's Day. There'd been a lot of hype and buzz for it. I was just desperate to watch it because I love Robert Eggers.
Yeah.
You know, The Witch, The Lighthouse, and The Northman were all fantastic. And again, he very much like Del Toro, he's got his own distinct visual style. And I just think what he did with Nosferatu was amazing. Have you seen the original film?
I have, yeah.
And have you seen the 70s one?
Yes, I have, which is which I rewatched recently purely to see if Klaus Kinski was playing good in it or not.
Yeah. So I mean, I think personally, I think the Eggers version is, you know, the ultimate one. I think what he did with the original material was just outstanding. You know, that I also really like Francis Ford Coppola's Bram Stoker's Dracula. So very different styles of films, but both, you know, executed excellently.
Yeah, it is nice for Vegas. He didn't try and do what Herzog did and try and change the names to the original, the one from the Dracula novel. They stuck with the names from the original 1922 film.
Yeah, he did, didn't he? Because the 70s version is Werner Herzog, isn't it, as the director? So he reverted back to using the characters from the Bram Stoker novel. And then Robert Eggers obviously made his in complete tribute to the original, you know, 1920s version. So yeah, it was cool that he reverted back to using the names that they couldn't use back then due to copyright.
Yeah, with Nosferatu, both the original one and the Eggers one, obviously they're inspired by Dracula. They both do something different with the vampire. It's not the same sort of figure as Dracula is in the novel.
Absolutely, yeah. He's much more demonic looking for a start, isn't he?
Yeah.
And yeah, he's much more of a monster. I mean, I love all iterations of Dracula, really. Like I said earlier, the Hammer horrors. Christopher Lee Dracula was probably the first one I ever saw. And if you go back and watch that film now, it's timeless. But it very much just borrows from Bram Stoker's story, and you know, they change quite a lot in it to kind of make it that sort of 85-minute version. But yeah, I mean, you've got Nosferatu, you've got that, you've got the Francis Ford Coppola one, and you don't want to see the same film made every time. So it's great that there's different versions to enjoy. That's why I'm excited for Del Toro's Frankenstein as well. You know, because the original ones from the 20s or 30s maybe, totally different to the Hammer horror ones of the 60s, 50s and 60s. And then obviously you had Kenneth Branagh's version from the mid-90s, which was very faithful to the story, but perhaps didn't quite work. I don't know, maybe for me, Robert De Niro didn't quite work as the monster.
Like I said, I've not seen it in a long time, so I can't actually say. But
Yeah.
I do wonder with that one whether he adapted the original 1818 version or the rewritten version in 1831, because with those two texts there's a difference. And the 1818 version is frankly better. So I don't know.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Yeah. I don't think I've read the later one. I've read the original one a couple of times. It felt like Branagh was trying to be sort of sympathetic to the text.
Yeah.
I hear with the Del Toro one, I think it's going to be presented from two different point of views. So I think we're going to have the point of view of Frankenstein and the point of view of the monster, which is interesting because the original Universal films very much heavily focus on the monster, whereas the Hammer horror films very much focus on Frankenstein. So it seems like he's maybe trying to combine, you know, the two elements there.
Yeah. Like I say, with Dracula, I'd love to get an actual face value just once.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So you're quite well read then? You've read a lot of old Gothic horror?
Quite a bit, yeah, and it's, you can sort of see the influence on horror going forward. Especially, interestingly, you usually see the influence go from the original books to the films in this anywhere between sort of 1930 and 1970, and then back into horror from 1970 onwards. It's a strange sort of.
Yeah, as a sort of as a historical genre, it's really interesting actually. Have you read Carmilla?
Yes, I have. Yeah.
Have you? I've not read it, but I've got it. I've kind of stockpiled a lot of classics actually, that, you know, they're on the to be read list, the to be read pile. And I've seen the Hammer horror films again, based on, you know, the Frankenstein trilogy. But I never realised until recently that the book existed and that it was written, you know, prior to Bram Stoker writing Dracula. So yeah, I'm looking forward to reading that.
Yeah, interestingly, the fan like Bram Stoker's Anglo-Irish, well, ascendancy Irish Protestant. It's interesting that comes that those two books about vampires come out of Ireland in the Victorian era. It's sort of interesting sort of context of why there is.
Yeah.
Another one to read if you haven't read it is The Vampire by Polidori, which is a short story. Interesting, it was written as a part of the same competition that Mary Shelley wrote Frankenstein.
Oh yeah, I've heard that. I'm aware of that story. Yeah.
It's really interesting. You can see the influence on Dracula there with this aristocratic vampire. You can see where Bram Stoker would have been drawn in from that. There's another one you could look at, which is called The Black Vampire, which was inspired by Polidori's story. Very interestingly, it's the first American vampire story and the first black vampire story.
Oh, okay. When was that written?
That was written in 1819.
Oh,
and
wow.
it wasn't. It's only recently been rediscovered in the past sort of 10 years. And it's not the best story in the world, to be honest, in terms of writing, but it is interesting the fact that it does something different with a vampire from sort of the typical thing we have with Stoker or with Sheridan the Fat or Polidori. So it's different. thing altogether.
Yeah, that sounds interesting. There's another one. Is it the Vordelak? Is that Russian?
I
Have you
think so.
heard of it?
Yeah.
I'm not sure when that dates from, but I know that the story was adapted in Black Sabbath, the old Mario Bava movie, and then I think it's been adapted a couple of times in addition to that as well. But I think that's a very, very old, possibly Russian vampire story. But I think vampires are generally one of the oldest sort of mythological folk monsters, aren't they? The mythology of them dates back hundreds and hundreds of years, Eastern Europe, and we still love them today. So
Yeah. Yeah, just to get back to Curse of Six, not to sort of spoil it, but you mentioned the Sam Raimi film Drag Me to Hell. Was there any one particular influence on sort of the way that the Grey Witch is sort of portrayed, or was that something that sort of came to you imagined?
yeah, I mean, I think in my head, the way in which she appears was that really comes from that Susan Hill Woman in Black influence. Again, it's set in a completely different time period, and it's a very different story to that. But I think that was a big influence on her. So I had to be careful not to call her the Black Witch. So she's the Grey Witch, actually, to try and differentiate her from that character.
It is. Well, I'm going to say one thing of reason it. I think some people might describe this as a ghost story, possibly, but that's an interesting thing, which is that if you look at a lot of sort of, and I think this is true, particularly of British ghost stories, a lot of the kind of ghost stories don't have a ghost in them. So a lot of Emma James's stuff, it's actually some kind of demonic entity that these characters are dealing with, not a ghost. Or
Yeah,
it's the same. It's a sort of strange thing that goes on, sort of in quote unquote ghost fiction quite a lot of the time.
yeah, I know what you mean. And I think, again, without kind of going into spoiler territory, I think she's maybe a bit of a combination of, I mean, it's definitely a ghost story, it's a curse story. I guess there's a slight demonic element to the ghost. It's a bit of a grey area, I think. I think she kind of, yeah, you're right. It is a ghost story. It's a haunting story. But I was quite pleased with how I put together the kind of the backstory and the lore to hopefully link it all to make sense. Because again, that isn't anything that I started writing the story knowing how it was going to turn out. It's something that you have to work out as you're going along, try and make sure that all the dots link, as it were.
Actually, on the, sorry,
Sorry.
I'm just going to ask, in terms of the lore, sort of where this entity comes from. I won't say what it is, but it's very much based in Irish folklore. Was that
Yeah.
something that you set out, or was that something that sort of naturally came to evolve and fitted with the story as you're writing it?
Yeah, and that's interesting because I don't think I set out with that intention, but as I was trying to complete the story and make it make sense, that is something that I just started researching quite a lot. And I can't actually look back and pinpoint where that idea came or why I went down that direction, but it seemed to fit the story, and I can remember doing a fair bit of research on a particular time period and obviously a particular place, which again, it's really kind of interesting to go down a rabbit hole like that when you're writing something, and in actual fact, one of the next stories that I wrote, which is my third novella, which I'm hoping is going to get picked up and potentially come out in a year or two, is a 17th century witch hunting story. And again, so that's kind of quite linked with this. But yeah, just to answer your question again, wasn't anything I planned, sort of came naturally as the story developed. And then I had real fun sort of researching a certain time period. to come up with a few, kind of to try and keep it sort of factual to a point.
Yeah. You mentioned that that next novella. Given the 17th century witch hunting element, is that in any way inspired by the Witchfinder General?
Absolutely, yeah. So I watched The Witchfinder General with Vincent Price, which is a great film, but there's no witches or anything supernatural in it at all. It's obviously just a film about the horrors of what went on in that time period, and one of the men that was involved in that. So having watched that, I thought, wouldn't it be good if you had a Matthew Hopkins Witchfinder General story that was fully supernatural? And I've ended up writing something which blends that with kind of a real sort of cosmic horror, almost Lovecraftian vibe. I'm really pleased about it, actually. It's a cool little story. And it's just got to that point where I'm just going to start shopping it around and see where we go with it.
Yeah. Is your story set during the English Civil War, or is it just set during the 17th century?
Is my story set where, sorry?
I know you said that story is going to be set in the 17th century. Will it be set in the English Civil War, or is it going to be like?
No, it is very much set right in the middle of the English Civil War. And again, the area that he operated in, kind of Norfolk, Essex, it's all set around there. But the good thing about that story is it will be the next one that I look to develop as a screenplay as well. So I'm currently working on the screenplay for The Curse of Six. And I think both stories, you can move that setting over to America if they were ever to be picked up and made into films, which, is a pipe dream, but hey, it could happen. You never know. You could certainly set The Curse of Six, take it out of, Sussex and South England and put it over there. And a 17th century witch trial story set over here, you could just move over to Salem over there, and it works both ways.
Yeah, it's the one thing that's always interesting about Matthew Hopkins is the fact that that type of witch hunting in England was only really occurred during the English Civil War. Before that, it was for those who don't know, in England, I say England as opposed to Britain because they're two very different things in the period. Witchcraft wasn't a religious crime; it was a criminal case. You actually
there was a criminal act. I think in the early 1600s, like 1605, somewhere around then, and that was the act that Matthew Hopkins and others, worked on as the legal side of what they were doing. But that act changed over the years. I think there's a bit of a mystery over, how Matthew Hopkins ended. So I've taken a bit of artistic license and written a story about what would be his final mission, as it were.
Yeah, he's interesting because, as you say, his ending is sort of mysterious, but also his beginning is he seems to come out from nowhere in about 1644, 45 to commit his acts and then disappear.
I know, yeah, absolutely. So again, I've created a completely fictitious backstory to his character, a completely fictitious end, and a completely fictitious mission that he goes on with his associate. It's good. It's one of those ones where you kind of finish writing it and you're really happy with how it's turned out.
I'm going to say, from what you mentioned that time, I'm looking forward to reading it. It sounds really interesting.
Yeah, thank you. So that's my third novella that I've written. I have written a second one, which comes out next summer with a different publisher to The Curse of Six. It's coming out with another indie publisher called Bain & Books Press. They were interested in The Curse of Six as well, but I'd already agreed the deal with RDG Books. So they asked if I had anything else, and I had just finished a story called A Slow Decay of Flowers, which is more of a kind of mystery thriller. It's set in Seattle and LA in the late 80s, early 90s, and it's about the mysterious death of a rock singer who's sort of on the precipice of hitting the big time. Dies under mysterious circumstances, and then the story is a bit of a mystery, kind of as to what caused his death, who caused his death. You know, was it natural? Was it foul play? And again, I think it's a pretty cool story. It's novella length, and it's coming out next summer. Then hopefully the witch hunting story will come out after that.
Yeah, I guess that sounds interesting as well. I'm looking forward to reading both of them.
Thank you.
Just as we'll bring things to an end shortly. But, with A Curse of Six, are you thinking? I know you said you just mentioned you turned it into screenplay. Have you got any ideas of writing a sequel, set something in the same universe as it, or is this going to be a one-off?
I think it's a one-off. As I'm developing the screenplay now, I'm revisiting the material and obviously picturing it completely different. I'm envisaging what it would be like on screen, you know, how it would need to flow from that point of view. And I've come up with an ending that actually does go a little bit beyond where the book ends. It's kind of making me think that The Curse of Six probably could have had enough material to be novel length originally. But like I said, it was the first time that I'd attempted to write anything beyond a short story. So it kind of contained itself within that sort of 27,000 word mark. But writing the screenplay, there is going to be more stuff in there, and it is giving me the opportunity to revisit and expand on certain scenes. So I think now the novella's out there, that is what it is. That will always be as it is. And then the screenplay has given me an opportunity to expand on it. Will I ever revisit it for a sequel? Never say never, but certainly no plans to. I think it is sort of a contained story within itself. You know, it has a distinct end. Well, I say it has a distinct end, but like I said, the screenplay is going to take it a little bit further with an extra kind of final twist. But yeah, how did you feel it wrapped up? You know, nicely.
Yeah, the ending was, as you say, everything sort of wrapped up nicely. I think it ended well.
Yeah, and I tried to write it as a bit of a mystery. You know, it's not a kind of linear narrative. It starts where it starts, then we go back in time and we kind of see what's happened in Stephen's life to get him to that point. Then we go back further and have a flashback which explains what's happening, you know, to him, and then we kind of come full circle at the end, and hopefully there's a little bit of a twist there that kind of maybe leads the reader in a slightly different direction as to what they might have thought was going to happen. That was my intention, but you know, I think everyone experiences stories slightly differently, but that was my intention.
Yeah. No, it very much worked when I read it, especially that type twist when you get at the end. I won't say what it is, but it worked really well.
Yeah, that's good to know. And then, yeah, like I said, the screenplay idea that I have, we add another twist onto the end. And I kind of thought to myself, would that have been good to put into the novella as well? But like I said, the novella's done. So the expansion of the story is going to come with the screenplay, which I'm, you know, not expecting that to ever see the light of day, but you never know. You know, 5 years from now could be an A24 hit. Who knows? That's the dream.
With any luck.
Yeah.
So that I'm going to say thank you, Mark, for coming on. It's been really enjoyable to talk to you, and I'm looking forward to reading your next two novellas when they come out.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thanks for inviting me on. You're obviously, really, you know your stuff with regards to the history of horror literature, so it's been cool to talk about that. Good supporter of indie authors, so keep doing what you're doing. That's really cool. What I will kind of finish with, for anyone that might want to connect with me on social media. If you search Mark Bates Writer on Instagram, X, Facebook, it should come up. My website is www.cultzilla.com, which is KULT-ZILLA. I'm just about to put out a 6th short story on Cultzilla, which is part of my the Curious Dark series. So they're completely free to read. I've got 5 stories out already. 6th one's going to come out later this month. Another website that hosts my work is the darkcorner.blog. They've got some really, really cool gothic-y stuff on there. So if you search Dark Corner Horror on Google, you should find their website. That'd be well worth having a look at. There's a couple of my stories on there, but dozens of others. But yeah, thanks for having me on. It's been a pleasure.
It's a great pleasure, Mark. Thank you for going on. And with that, BookTube, I will say goodbye, and I'll see you later. Bye, BookTube.
Bye-bye.